Hello and welcome to the Daily Aus. I'm Emma Gillespie.
I'm Billi FitzSimons.
The federal government has confirmed that YouTube will be included in its social media ban for children under 16. The video streaming platform was originally going to be exempt from the ban, but following mounting pressure from Australia's eSafety Commissioner, the government has changed its mind. The move has drawn criticism from the opposition, while YouTube's parent company Google is reportedly considering legal action against the government over the decision.
So, we're talking today about this social media ban for under 16s. Now, this is legislation that has actually already been tabled in Parliament and, as I understand it, has already gone through.
Yeah.
For anyone who missed this, because I think it happened at the very end of last year, do you want to just explain the context of this?
Yeah, so you might remember last year, it was November when the government introduced its bill to ban under 16-year-olds from social media. Now, that followed this kind of intense public campaign that gained a lot of media attention, a lot of celebrity endorsements, a lot of parents and schools were on board, essentially saying that the government needed to do a better job of protecting young people's mental health in the online space. So off the back of that campaign, Australia became the first country in the world to legislate an age-specific social media ban. So under the legislation, platforms including Snapchat, Instagram, X, TikTok, Reddit, Facebook, they all have to block any user under 16 from having an account on their platform. And the responsibility basically will fall on the platforms themselves. So it'll be up to social media companies to enforce this ban, and failure to comply will result in fines of $50 million.
Okay, so the Australian government introduces this ban for social media for under 16-year-olds, but YouTube is exempt from the ban.
Yep.
What was the government's reasoning at the time as to why YouTube was exempt?
So initially, YouTube was not included in this legislation, as you mentioned, Billi, predominantly because the government said it's used for learning. YouTube is used as an educational resource. So in a speech last year, then Communications Minister Michelle Rowland said YouTube, as well as some other platforms like messaging platform WhatsApp, which is also exempt, quote, enable young people to get the education and health support they need. So the logic was basically that unlike Instagram, TikTok, and Facebook, that YouTube serves as more of an educational tool. So it's used by teachers and students for tutorials, videos, documentaries, historical docos and videos, scientific experiments, all these kinds of resources, rather than being used as a social networking platform designed around user-generated content and social interaction. So there is a social element to YouTube in the comments, for example, but the government basically said a lot of people come to the platform for a use that is completely different. YouTube also already requires children under 13 to provide a parent or guardian's contact details when they create an account. And they also have YouTube Kids, which you might have heard of. It's a separate platform designed specifically for really young users, and there are more content restrictions on YouTube Kids.
It's funny how different platforms are used by different people for different things.
Yeah.
I have to say I do not use YouTube for educational purposes, or if I do, the extent of that was makeup tutorials when I was growing up.
But you could argue that's kind of an educational
yeah.
resource. It's still a tutorial.
Yeah, that and comedy sketches. So perhaps wasn't using it for the best thing. But hey,
it was
some
the
people
early days.
It was. And so now the government has changed its course. What prompted this shift?
So there were a few key factors that seemed to have influenced this decision to include YouTube in the ban. And when it was first confirmed last year that YouTube would be exempt, you can imagine that this drew a lot of criticism from other social media companies. They argued that it wasn't fair to have a kind of separate set of rules for one and not the others. And this year we've really seen a concerted effort from the eSafety Commissioner. So this is Australia's top online safety advisor. The Commissioner's name is Julie Inman-Grant. And in June, so last month, she issued official advice to the federal government urging it to reconsider its stance specifically around YouTube. So she pointed out that you can still access YouTube without an account, but argued that the platform has evolved beyond just educational content and that young people are still at risk if they hold an account and if they are engaging with the platform. So eSafety recommended there be no exemptions for specific platforms under the legislation because, quote, the relative risks and harms can change at any given moment across different types of social media. In an address to the National Press Club, Julian Mangrant said that recent eSafety research had shown 4 in 10 children reported being exposed to harmful content on YouTube, which was the highest of any platform. So that research really drove this push by eSafety to get YouTube included in the ban.
Okay, so Australia's eSafety Commissioner said that in June. At the time, how did YouTube respond to those claims?
So YouTube has rejected those claims roundly. Its public policy senior manager, Rachel Lord, criticised eSafety's advice, saying the video sharing platform is widely used in classroom teaching. And in a statement, Lord said banning YouTube would ignore evidence from teachers and parents that YouTube is suitable for younger users. So they really leaned on that kind of community messaging that this is not the same type of social media as your kind of Meta-owned platforms and the others.
Got it. Did the other social media platforms that were included in the ban have anything to say about YouTube's exemption?
Yeah, so the criticism has broadly been that if the government was serious about protecting children from online harms, then the world's largest video platform shouldn't get special treatment. So TikTok, for example, its policy director in Australia, Ella Woods-Joyce, compared YouTube's exemption to, quote, banning the sale of soft drinks to minors but exempting Coca-Cola.
Interesting.
Yeah.
We love an analogy.
We sure do.
Okay, so clearly there was mounting pressure from the big social media platforms and also the eSafety Commissioner to ensure that there are no exemptions. And that pressure seemed to have worked because this week the government announced that YouTube would no longer be exempt and now under 16-year-olds will be banned from using that platform. How did this announcement unfold this week?
So after the eSafety Commissioner wrote to the government in June with that advice, we heard from the government. It said that basically the Communications Minister, Annika Wells, was carefully considering that advice. And so that's where things stayed at for a few weeks until Tuesday night when the government announced YouTube would be subject to the same age restrictions as other social media platforms. We got a statement from Prime Minister Anthony Albanese's office which said the decision followed extensive consultation and was informed by advice from the eSafety Commissioner. The statement said online gaming, messaging apps, health and education services, though, would not be included in the ban, quote, because they pose fewer social media harms to under 16s or are regulated under different laws. So that includes WhatsApp, for example. WhatsApp will not be included or affected by the ban. But the change does mean that from December, YouTube will be subject to the same minimum age laws that platforms like TikTok, Instagram and Snapchat will have to adhere to. And at a press conference on Wednesday, the Communications Minister Annika Wells said the evidence of harms to young users on YouTube cannot be ignored. She said, quote, there is no perfect solution when it comes to keeping young Australians safe online, but the social media minimum age laws will make a meaningful difference.
We want kids to know who they are before platforms assume who they are. These are not set and forget rules, these are set and support rules. They are world leading, but this is manifestly too important for us not to have a crack.
And so you mentioned before that YouTube does have the educational content on its platform, the ones that are much more educational than the makeup tutorials I watched when I was 16. But in terms of, I know that there are, documentaries there, which, maybe teachers would even use to help with classes that they're teaching.
Yeah.
Did the Communications Minister, Annika Wells, say anything about whether that educational content will be accessible still?
Yeah, well, I think it's worth noting that the restriction only applies to YouTube account holders. So under 16-year-olds won't be allowed to log in on YouTube, but they can still watch videos on the platform, the same way any of us can without having to log in. So that doesn't change the classroom aspect. That doesn't stop kids from watching potentially helpful videos, but it also doesn't stop them from seeing potentially harmful content either.
That's interesting. So here they are really just banning under 16s from creating an account, but YouTube is unlike something like Twitter or X, I should say, or Instagram, where you actually need an account in order to view content on those platforms.
Exactly.
But YouTube is not like that.
And the other really important aspect to having a YouTube account is the algorithm that comes with that.
Yes.
So if you are logged in on YouTube, then the intuitive kind of nature of the algorithm pays attention to what you watch. It starts to learn about your habits. It starts to serve you videos that it think you might want to watch. And it's that kind of rabbit hole algorithm that's been really criticized in terms of promoting violence or serving videos to young boys that could be seen as kind of radicalizing them towards becoming violent. So the algorithm aspect is a really big one. And if you're a casual or more passive YouTube consumer, you're not logged in. It's not learning about you. It's not suggesting video content to you.
Hello, Billi here from TDA. We have just looked at our YouTube analytics and 95% of you who are watching our videos aren't subscribing. If you want to help independent media like us grow, the best way you can do that is by pressing subscribe. Thank you so much, and back to the video.
Another story that I have read about this week is in relation to Google, which is YouTube's parent company, and them potentially considering suing the Australian government. What is that story about?
So meanwhile, in the background of all of this, we've got reports from the Daily Telegraph that Google is threatening legal action against the government for proceeding with including YouTube in the ban. So we haven't seen the full details of Google's legal arguments, but they have previously raised concerns about the timing and the feasibility of age verification systems. So this all relies on successful age verification technology. And in submissions to Parliament last year, Google warned against introducing the law before tested age verification systems are in place. Now, despite the government's claims that it is running age verification trials that have been mostly successful, Google has pointed out that the full age verification system trial won't be finished until mid next year, making the bill's timing concerning, in its words. Annika Wells has addressed this, the communications minister, saying the government's waiting on the age assurance final recommendations, but she said that they will publish those recommendations as soon as possible.
So they, just so I understand, they are suing over the timeline, but not necessarily the suggestion of YouTube being included.
Well, this is all reported by the Daily Telegraph, but the suggestion is, yes, that they're considering legal action because of the timeline and because the technology might not have met the timeline. And there's also a potential argument about challenging the legislation on constitutional grounds. So the Daily Telegraph report cited a letter sent by Google to the communications minister, which said including YouTube in the ban would diminish the, quote, implied constitutional freedom of political communication. So a free speech argument there.
And how has the government responded to this threat of legal action from Google?
Speaking yesterday, the Prime Minister acknowledged this ban isn't going to be a simple or easy process, but he said the government wants it to be a cooperative one. So he's really calling on the platforms to fall in line, and he essentially dismissed claims that they don't have the resources or the technology to roll out age verification. Here's a little bit of what the Prime Minister said.
They know where you go, who you talk to, what you're interested in. They do keep that information. And during the election campaign, if they could identify for political parties in order to encourage us to invest on their platforms on an issue like childcare, identifying women between a particular age, in a particular seat, in a particular demographic, with particular postcodes, then they can help out here too. They can use the capacity which we know that they have.
Has the opposition responded to the YouTube announcement?
So the coalition, interestingly, has supported this social media ban for under 16-year-olds.
They were very much in favour of it.
Exactly. They really were on board. But since news that YouTube was going to be included, they have been pretty critical of the government. So the coalition are not criticising the ban itself, but they've said that Labor has essentially broken a promise with this backflip. We've heard from Shadow Communications Minister Melissa McIntosh, who has accused the government of a lack of transparency. She said Labor, quote, cannot hide the fact that they deliberately misled the public at the last election by promising to keep YouTube out of the social media age minimum. She said the coalition is concerned that the eSafety Commissioner as well is testing boundaries, quote, which are moving beyond what Australians are comfortable with.
So in terms of what happens next, you said before that this comes into effect on the 10th of December, I believe you said. And so what needs to happen between now and then?
Yeah, so as you said, this legislation is due to come into effect in December. The eSafety Commissioner will be responsible for enforcing the new rules against the social media companies, but it will be up to each platform to roll out their own strategies to ensure they're complying with the law. So in terms of how they do that, we need, I suppose, more concrete evidence or advice on age verification technology. But it is worth noting that the legislation places the responsibility on the platforms, not the users. So not on young people or their parents. Users are not going to face penalties for attempting to access these platforms. Now, in terms of the legal threat, Google may follow through on that, and that could involve challenging this legislation in the federal court. In order to avoid that, purely speculating here, but the government might end up negotiating or working with them to kind of prevent legal action from going all the way to court. And that could look like, some flexibility on the technical implementation of age verification or some delays. So the legal threat could potentially delay implementation. But given the bipartisan support that we've seen for this legislation and the substantial work that's already been done on the age verification trials, the government seems, pretty sternly committed to proceeding with the December deadline.
Something tells me we are going to be hearing a lot more about it in the months to come.
Exactly.
Emma, thank you so much for explaining that.
Thank you.
And thank you so much for listening to this episode of The Daily Aus. Or you might be listening or watching on YouTube. Hopefully you're over 16.
Hello.
We'll be back this afternoon with your evening headlines, but until then, have a good day.